top-notch internal auditors, world-class internal audit functions. The Internal Audit Mastery Podcast with your host, Alan Meisner, starts now.
Hello, and welcome to Internal Audit Mastery Podcast. I'd like to start off this week with a quote, our quote of the week. It's by Nelson Jackson. I do not believe you can do today's job with yesterday's methods and be in business tomorrow. We have two underwriting themes going through the week, one being change and the second being value. And I think these are intertwined in many ways, as is depicted in this quote. Our book application of the week is by Spencer Johnson. It's Who Moved My Cheese? I love this book. It's written in a child's story format, but the lessons are quite adult, in that each of us deals with change in our own way. And in dealing with change, we as auditors have to know that we are affecting change on our organizations, but we're also affected by the changes in our organizations and in our profession. Last Wednesday, I attended a webinar put on by the IAA related to some fairly significant changes that are coming across. The IPPF, the framework for our professional practice, is going through an exposure draft for changes. While they don't actually change the standards, it does have far-reaching effects on the profession. It was a very informative webinar. I really enjoyed it, but it does give me a lot of pause for thought as I look at what the changes are and how they're going to affect my job and our profession going forward. I would encourage you to take some time to read through that exposure draft and provide your comments. The deadline for those responses to the IIA is November 4th. Although I understand they're kind of working through some of the responses now, so I guess the sooner you get them in, the better. On another front, I did attend also a webinar put on by the IIA and Robert Half. And this dealt with another change that I think a lot of us chief audit executives are going to be dealing with, and that's managing a workforce that's changing. Baby boomers are retiring and leaving the workforce, and the millennials, and I guess what they're now calling the Gen Z group, are starting to join this workforce. It's going to be quite a challenge for us, and I would encourage you as an auditor and as a manager and as a chief audit executive to take some time to understand how these new workers coming into the workplace are going to think and act and function, so that you can make sure that you're able to deal with that change and make the work environment work well for them. I'd like to point out that October is Cybersecurity Month. In addition to supporting this initiative, ISACA is rolling out Cybersecurity Foundation Certificate. This is a certificate, I guess, to indicate your knowledge and base in cybersecurity. I have a link in the show notes to their fact sheet. I encourage you to take a look at that. It's kind of interesting timing for this month to occur, as in the past month there were two fairly significant information security events in the news. The first I'll talk to is the Home Depot breach of the credit card data. Effectively, this one may be bigger than the Target leak we had last December, but it appears that this one was the exploit of simply unpatched machines. It shouldn't happen, but apparently it does happen more than we'd like. The second one is called the shell shock bash bug. This affects Linux and Apple machines, said to affect as many as 500 million machines. And it's basically just a vulnerability that exists in the system, not unlike the Heartbleed, although this one may be bigger than the Heartbleed. So I'd encourage you, if you haven't updated your Linux or Apple machine, to do the install. You do have a vulnerability, the shell shock bash bug. They come up with some pretty interesting names for these things, but make sure you're checking those things out. Also this week I did write a couple of articles on value. The first of which where I go through the process of trying to from my perspective, define audit value in a fairly clear term. And then the second of the articles is where I've gone through and talked about how we find value. And obviously there's higher value for audit to find. It's often more difficult to measure. It's often more difficult to do. But there are opportunities for us to continue to grow and expand our services, which leads me into the meat of today's program. I know the following statement is going to come off as blasphemy, but I don't believe internal audit should be engaged in auditing strategy or providing assurance on strategic risk. Now that I have your attention, in this program, I'll discuss the path current internal audit thought leadership is setting for us. I'll explain why I feel this move may be a mistake for most of us, and I'll put forward a practical solution for you to consider in reconciling aspirational guidance with the realities of managing audit risk. I'll repeat my previous statement. I don't believe internal audit should be engaged in auditing strategy or providing assurance on strategic risk. I'll admit this is a paradigm shift for me. I've long recognized that traditional financial and operational auditing often leaves us short of addressing the biggest risks of our companies. I could say it's always been this way, but I know better. When I first started in the profession, most of the audits being done were financial audits. Operational audit was something that was kind of out there, new wave. The bigger companies were doing it. The smaller companies, we didn't quite have the capacity to do that type of thing. So we stuck to our guns. We stuck to what we knew. And we were good at it, and we kept doing it. Over time, that model's evolved. This may very well be that same type of thing, but it does appear we're reaching that critical mass. I also know that it's a critical part of the auditor's DNA to constantly be rethinking what is, looking for better answers. If constant improvement isn't part of your mission statement, it should be. The profession is looking ahead. In PwC's 2014 State of the Internal Audit Profession Study, Higher Performance by Design, a Blueprint for Change, this was published in March 2014. I'm going to quote a couple things from this. More than half, 55% of senior management told us that they do not believe internal audit adds significant value to their organization. Nearly 30% of board members believe internal audit adds less than significant value. On average, only 49% of senior management and 64% of board members believe internal audit is performing well at delivering on expectations. While many reported that their internal audit functions made progress during the past year, performance issues identified in prior year's research continue, and stakeholders told us that the progress has not been sufficient to keep pace with the changing business environment. This year's research once again confirms that today's increasingly complex and risky business landscape has resulted in many internal audit functions struggling to be viewed as valuable. Further, internal audit's ability to build the right capabilities and deliver on expectations continues to be challenged. Okay, I'll skip ahead a little bit. In organizations where internal audit expectations are narrow, yet the chief audit executive has gained consensus on those expectations and aligned capabilities to deliver, some stakeholders reported receiving value. Our evidence shows that internal audit can deliver greater value for the enterprise if stakeholders expand their expectations and internal audit expands its capabilities in response. I can't say that I disagree with anything that's in that article. It's actually quite a good research piece, and again, well worth a read. I have a link in the show notes, and I encourage you to go take a look at it. I'd also like to quote from Norman Mark's blog. Has a great blog. I'll have links again in the show notes. And in his blog, leaders of internal audit should never be satisfied. And this just came out this month, or last month. Part of the problem is that audit committees don't understand the potential of internal audit, and too many CAEs are not educating them. So they don't demand more, and too many CAEs are satisfied doing what is expected without trying to change and upgrade those expectations. This is so compelling. I want to make my company the best it can be. I want to help management address the biggest risks. I know I have something to offer, but... So I want to take a step back and I want to think about what I am good at. So what is my department best at? Well, we definitely know financial controls. Most of the folks that come into audit come with a financial statement or financial audit background. That's fairly common. So we know financial controls. We know operational controls. We've been doing this for a long, long time. We know compliance controls. We know information technology controls. We know process improvement, efficiency, and effectiveness. We're good at fraud investigation. And we're really good at helping management and the board understand risk. Are we excellent at that? And generally, yes. We are very good at those things, and we're working to get better. So great. Should we expand our services? Well, as you can see, thought leaders, they definitely think we should. They think we're getting left behind, and they think we're doing a disservice to our company. But what do soldiers in the field think? What do the auditors that are doing the work think? Well, that webinar I went to on Wednesday, or attended on Wednesday, it's kind of funny I say I went to. I sat at my desk and listened to. It talked about, it had some surveys, and granted, I recognize that these little spot surveys are not, they're not scientific and they're not nearly as in-depth as what PwC did, but they asked a fairly interesting question. A survey, the question they ask is compliance with the current standards too easy, too hard, or just right? Well, 78% answered just right, and I'll admit I was in that group. 18% answered this too hard, and 3% answered too easy. So if we're looking at raising the bar, if we're looking at doing more, clearly only 3% believe we have significant capacity to do that. The other 78%, well, we might. Then some of us probably think, yeah, we could do more. But 18%, clearly, almost 20% of those answering are struggling to comply today. And we're asking them to potentially do more. I did a spot survey on the website to kind of get a feel for where people were at. And then granted, I went to LinkedIn and I hit the Chief Audit Executive group and I hit a couple other internal audit groups just to see what I would get. I didn't get a big turnout, 10 people, thank you. So I guess I shouldn't say only 10, but 10 great people, thank you. General results are most, 40% said they are auditing strategy, and I believe 20% said that they were aspiring to audit. So clearly a large percentage of the group either aspire to or are auditing in the strategy realm. And that's good. That's good. My real question is, should everybody be doing it? If 96% of us, the 78% plus the 18%, feel we're fully engaged, is it time to expand? In the book Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less by Greg McKeown, he discusses the paradox of success. which is summed up in 4 predictable phases. Phase 1, when we really have clarity of purpose, it enables us to succeed at our endeavor. Okay, so we're really good at something, we understand it, we're going to be good at it, we're going to do it well, and we're going to succeed. Okay, phase 2, we have success. We gain a reputation as a go-to person. We become good old insert name, who's always there when you need him, and we are presented with increased options and opportunities. Okay. Phase 3, we have increased options and opportunities, which is actually code for demands on our time and energies. It leads us to diffused efforts. We get spread thinner and thinner. And then phase 4, we become distracted from what would otherwise be our highest level of contribution. The effect of our success has been to undermine the very clarity that led to our success in the first place. Does this sound familiar? Are we at risk of overpromising and underdelivering? Are we at that phase 2 level where we're really good at what we're doing, we're succeeding, and now we're looking to that next bar, we're looking to that next thing, and we have that potential that maybe we're overreaching a little. Okay, Google started out doing one thing, search. They perfected it. Then they moved on to other areas, click ads, video sharing, social media, Google Glass, self-parking cars. Can audit departments do the same thing? Continue to expand into new areas? Of course. But do you remember Orkut? Google Wave? Google Buzz? Google succeeds by throwing things at the wall and wins if one sticks. Can your audit department afford to do that? Can you afford to fail at any of your assurance scope? No doubt there's an expectation gap. It's always existed. Every time there's a business failure, the question always comes up, where were the auditors? Auditing strategy is the most challenging effort an auditor could take on. Does your organization have an established model for planning and strategy building? Most of the companies I've worked for, the process is more organic than that. It's so organic that it's not really even a defined process. Is that a problem? Well, I don't know. You're successful at doing something. It's the people, maybe not the process, and maybe that's okay. Can we codify what those people are thinking and doing and make it into a process that's auditable? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I could see some value in addressing the systems and processes that provide inputs to the process. In fact, currently, when I do audits that include management reporting areas, we keep those in there. So if there's management reporting risks inside our financial or operational auditing or the systems that we're auditing, we keep that in scope. And we do provide some assurance, I guess, at that level that information is reliable and can be used. But are we willing to opine on the output of the strategy process? Are we capable of doing so? I mean, if I know that they used the right data to go into their decision-making process, but in the process of doing things, they omit data that they're providing to the board, am I obliged now as an auditor to tell the board, oh, well, they didn't tell you about this thing, or they omitted this data? Where do we stand in trying to provide that kind of assurance? And at what point can we provide that assurance? Okay, I know many of you are still not convinced. So I'll offer one last reason to consider letting strategy auditing go. Okay, management is focused on strategy 99% of the time. As a result, they let little things go. Those little things are the things that could trip them up. The football coach and players are focused on strategy and execution on the strategy. What they aren't paying much attention to is the condition of the field. And that could adversely affect their play. I think there's great value in being a groundskeeper. The football coach and players are engaged in play, adjusting the game as it goes forward, while trainers work with various players to keep them healthy and in the game. I think there's great value in being a trainer. If audit is focusing on the things that can hamper performance of the company, we are adding value. And if we're excellent at that, then we're going to make sure those little things don't trip up the company and the management team while they're focused on the big things. I don't know that audit needs to be involved in the big things to truly be adding value to their organization. What audit cannot afford to do is to fail at those small things, let those small things trip the company, and feign that it's outside of our responsibility, because it clearly is not. So instead of striving to be everything to everybody, I'd like to propose a better solution. Meet with the stakeholders. The PwC paper kept saying stakeholders want, stakeholders. Well, okay, they didn't interview my stakeholders. At least I don't believe they did. Maybe they're in a lower percentile bracket, but I don't believe they interviewed my stakeholders. And so I'm going to interview my stakeholders, the management and the audit committee. And if it's relevant to you, regulators and others. But for me, it's management and audit committee. And discuss the following: enterprise risks. And in having that discussion with them about enterprise risk, you want to understand their perspective. What are the things that do matter most to them? And what do they feel is the area where they need help, where they need your engagement? Okay? You can provide to them what your service level opportunities are. And I gave you a guideline in the value write-up I did earlier this week. You can also use the PwC Internal Audit Delivery Continuum. I tied these two together fairly easily, so you can use either one. Have a discussion with them to help them understand the areas where you can add value to the company. Talk about the current risks and your current coverage, what you're doing and what you're not doing. So it's very clear to them what your scope is. And then agree that scope. Okay. Once you've agreed what your current scope is going to be, then document that scope in your charter. So make sure it's in your internal audit department charter. Okay. And then align your department 100% on hitting those. That's you. That's all you do. And you do it excellently. Just 100%. Training, quality review, everything is aimed at that one thing. Be good at it. Be great at it. Be excellent. Okay. Demonstrate to your stakeholders that you're delivering on that promise. So you have that base of operation. You demonstrated that. And then rinse and repeat. So, once a year, once a quarter, whatever's appropriate to your organization, sit down with those same stakeholders and look for those opportunities where you can expand scope. But do so with full agreement from your stakeholders and awareness of the risks you're taking with a broader scope. You can't add a product line to your business without taking on some risk. And you, as the auditor, have to know the risk you're taking on. We call it audit risk. We can't move away from understanding that we have audit risk. If it's in our scope and we miss it, we missed it. As an auditor, I can't afford that. I have to be excellent. I have to cover my bases. So I'm not going to take on a responsibility I'm not capable of doing. Okay, so I'm going to recap a little bit. We should make sure we are maximizing our performance on the things we have traditionally done. Okay, 100%. Be 100%. The financial, the operational, the IT, the compliance. Be excellent at those. Provide some operational auditing with efficiency and effectiveness. Get in there and help the business be better, but do it from your points of strength. We should regularly check in with our stakeholders to ensure we understand their expectations and they understand our full scope. Document this in your charter. If there's an expectation gap, we should educate the stakeholders on current capabilities and take steps to increase our capacity through outsourcing, co-sourcing, hiring, and training. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. We should listen to our stakeholders. We should educate our stakeholders, but we should not sell something to our stakeholders that we are not capable of staffing and we are not capable of managing. We need to be 100% on things that we are going to do. We can't be like Google and have our or cuts. Oh, well, I wasn't really good at that. I'll throw it out and I'll try something different. That doesn't work in internal auditing. Focus on providing the highest quality service possible on the scope you have and leave the rest to management to handle. I like to think of the serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you for being a part of this program. I hope you found it useful. I welcome your feedback either through the comments on internalauditmastery.com blog post, on YouTube, or iTunes. This is episode 2. I'd also appreciate if you take the time to subscribe and rate the podcast on iTunes. That helps me get the word out. Thank you. Have a great day.
The information in this program is for general education purposes only and should not be construed as direct advice. The opinions and views expressed by the host and guests are theirs and theirs alone and do not reflect positions held by the companies they currently work for or have worked for in the past.
That concludes this episode of the Internal Audit Mastery Podcast. If you enjoyed this show, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube, and visit us at internalauditmastery.com.